All right, I've started the recording.
Oh, kia ora. Okay, we'll get underway. Okay. I ngā mana whenua o tēnei takiwa o nai tahu me nai tua huriri tēnā koutou katoa. I ngā hauia whā, tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā koe Nathaniel, ngā mihi mai oha, nau mai haere mai i te hui. He mihi ana ki a koe mō te kaupapa o te rā. Okay. Just gonna get us out the way. He karakia timatanga, ka hikatia, hikitia, whakarewa ki runga rawa, herea kia kore e hoki whakamuri mai, paua atu te pūmanawa Māori, he mana tikanga me te uri o maia, poia nā mokopuna nā rangatira mō a popo ka tihei mauri ora. Morena koutou. Thank you for your attendance this morning, and we'd love to extend a very, very warm welcome to Dr. Nathaniel Swain. Thank you so much for your availability and your generosity to be with us this morning. Just wanted to start with some tikanga before we get underway. We're just asking that people can mute their mics as they arrive, and please use the chat box for any questions. Nathaniel's going to answer questions at the end, and keep an eye on the chat as we go. The session is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the slides at the completion of the session. I'd like to do a mihi to our colleagues, Avril Manning and Angela Seb, our curriculum advisors secondary, who've brought this online session to us today. We're very, very pleased to connect with Nathaniel. We've done lots of reading and work. This session has come about through the development of a reference group for our middle leaders here in Canterbury to support the curriculum, and through the evaluations and insights, one of the key areas was understanding the science of learning in a secondary context, and most importantly, practical application and strategies to support practice. So thank you, everybody. We don't want to take any more of your time. We'll be pausing at the end for an opportunity to complete the evaluation. But if you're joining here today as a group, we'd love to hear who's in the chat. Please let us know how many are joining with you. And without any further time, I'm going to stop my sharing, and so then I can see you all, which will be fabulous, and hand over to Nathaniel. Morena e hoa. You're on mute, Nathaniel.
Classic rookie error there. Sorry, everyone. Thank you so much for that very wonderful welcome, and just a fantastic opportunity to connect with educators in Aotearoa this morning. It's 7 a.m. here in Melbourne, and I'm really excited to be with you for the next hour. We will make time for questions as well as the evaluation at the end of the session. I've called this session Using Writing as a Tool for Thinking, and I think given our commitment as secondary teachers to really ensure that our students are enriching their lives with the learning, the content, and the thinking that our subjects afford, I think it is fitting to see writing as that tool, and that this is a really important, I guess, choice of words, if you like, in this day and age, where we aren't just getting students to write for the sake of writing, because after all, they could outsource that to AI if they would like to at this point. We really want to see writing as a tool that allows them to connect with and really understand and challenge the thinking within our subjects that we're trying to teach. It would be great in a moment. I'll get some thoughts from you, but this first chart, this first task here, I actually want to grab thoughts from you via the chat, if you wouldn't be so kind. So do feel free to put in what are your common challenges with writing, and particularly if you've got a certain subject that you're thinking about, I'd love to hear what they are in terms of common issues that you have with your students' writing skills. So if you could share that in the chat now, that would be great. What kinds of challenges are you seeing in the classroom with your students in the subjects that you're teaching? So we've got motivation and lack of confidence. Thank you so much for being the first people off the rank there. Catering for English as second language speakers. Yeah, basic sentence structures, not answering the question. Yeah, physical endurance, can't write as long as anymore with device use increasing. Yeah. And I do notice that in the recent assessments that have been brought in from ZQA, that it is a handwritten assessment, whereas in other jurisdictions, they're moving towards an online assessment. So this is, I guess, showing up potentially some of those challenges when you don't have access to a keyboard and you have to physically write it yourself, which for some students, they might not be as adept with that writing fluency. I'm also seeing spelling, lack of focus. I'm also seeing mechanics, basic editing, legible writing when devices are not being used. Yeah, thank you, Donna, for picking up on that point. Writing can be perceived as very slow compared to a video chat. Okay, yeah, that's true. It does take longer than having a chat on the video. Physical endurance, yeah. Low literacy levels, excellent. Well, thank you. This is really helpful. Essentially, I always see very similar things with this question with schools that I work with. And no matter where we're talking about, whether it's Australia or New Zealand or a secondary or primary, these common challenges do come through. So the ones that I usually have are what's technically called a run-on, which some people call difficulty with punctuation, but it's essentially not knowing the sentence boundaries and having difficulty seeing what those are. We've also got imprecise vocabulary, so not sufficiently clear enough about what they're meant to be talking about, using maybe very common or very everyday sort of language rather than the specific vocabulary from the discipline. Repetitive structures, where the same sentences or same paragraphs are repeated again and again with some slight variations. Unclear links between ideas as well. So could be trying to get points across but not making sense, which is some of the ideas that have come through in the chat just then, as well as this idea of essays as all one paragraph. So just one big response. I think it's really important to know that if you've got unique sort of challenges, that I'd be really interested to know what they are. But in many ways, the common challenges with writing are very common. I was just looking in preparation for this talk, actually, at what kinds of writing are required in the assessment tasks that have been sort of introduced. And I know this is all very new and offering lots of challenges, but in some ways, this is quite a short piece that is required here in this article sort of piece, for example, and they can choose either topic A or topic B. But I'm guessing that these kinds of writing challenges find their way right to the surface when they're being asked to respond and having to put their writing together in an extended form. What's one issue I have with these forms of assessment, though, which I guess is somewhat unavoidable when you are assessing writing across the curriculum, is that these topics that have been chosen are quite non-specific. So this is, essentially quite generic pieces that will be created out of this. Non-fiction, so non-narrative, some little bit of agree or disagree, for example, so a sense of persuasion, but potentially quite high level, zoomed out sort of pieces that don't necessarily reflect the subject knowledge or text knowledge that might be developed in your subject areas. I'm wondering if these kinds of questions, just respond in the chat if it's the case, if it's been hard to teach or hard to help students improve on these kinds of questions here. Just respond in the chat or with some reactions if that's the case. This is where it's sort of pure grammar sort of coming through. I would expect that if this hasn't been assessed very much before, that this sort of is quite hard to wrap your head around. We might come back to, why one of these answers is correct and the others aren't, and how it does reflect what they're trying to assess is essentially a common understanding of grammar and understanding of sentence structure that if you don't have that clear idea in your own head about how to explain it to yourself or to your students, it can be very difficult. So I might come back to that in just a moment, but let me just reflect on this question here. Are we in an age where writing doesn't actually matter? This is really something important to ask because this point has been made in recent commentary around the world in the recent years. One reason I think it does matter is because of its relationship with thinking, and that writing does require students to commit ideas down to paper in a way that spoken language or in a way that interaction doesn't necessarily. And I think in this process of writing, we can help students to actually articulate their thoughts better. So whenever we work on grammar or whenever we work on written expression or using language in a more productive way, I do firmly believe that we are actually helping students to clarify and understand their own thoughts and to organize them in a logical sequence. So this is a quote from Joan Didion that I'll let you read. So Didion is an author, and she talks about the fact that she writes because it's the best chance for her to actually clarify what she thinks about something. So until you've actually written something down, it can be hard to understand your own thinking potentially. So this is, I guess, something that you can't necessarily replace by just putting something into AI. And in fact, in recent studies, I'll let you read this quote in a moment, we've found that students are outsourcing their thinking to AI, and this does not bode well for their general knowledge and their engagement in the material. Just have a read of this quote from Carl Hendrick. So this one's a little bit telling, I think. Essentially, it sort of sounds a bit harsh, but being able to outsource your thinking is something that some learners, including this is college level, but secondary learners are already doing now, is something that they will take advantage of. There's a tendency in human sort of development, if you like, to find shortcuts or heuristics. And ChatGPT or other generative AI tools are a heuristic or a shortcut. And unfortunately, it's a shortcut that means that it prevents the learning process in some ways, especially if students haven't had a chance to do some work or some thinking beforehand. I have another study which we'll bring up a little bit later. That's just, I'll just bring that up in a second. But this other sort of, I might just see if I can quote it here and put it into the chat for you if you wanted to read more. Here it is. It's talking about outsourcing thinking and the problems with AI. This little discussion piece that you might enjoy is there. And the other one that I just linked to is also going into the chat now as well, in case you want to read that one whole piece from Carl Hendrick. But in the piece that I just shared, essentially, there is a concern, I guess, that when students don't get a chance to draft their own pieces first before they use any tools from AI or Grammarly to sort of fix it up, it means that they don't engage with the material nearly as well. And that's a big problem. It actually links beautifully to some of the key messages that I have for you today and that I want to return to before we finish our discussion. This will be a short sort of introduction to some of these big ideas, but hopefully giving you some concrete tools and strategies and some resources that I'm keen for you to explore as well. So my key messages is that the sentence and paragraph level of writing is really foundational, and that when we don't understand how sentences work or how best to teach simple and easy to understand paragraphs, that this can cause fundamental problems with writing that we've been talking about in the chat. Sentences are the building blocks of paragraphs and texts. And like the phonics for the teaching of early reading, sentences are so fundamental that they really necessitate close attention, even though historically they haven't been a big focus in our instruction in New Zealand or Australia. Teaching writing efficiently and effectively is something that we want to aim for, meaning that we should actually think about having things like a scope and sequence, even in secondary, of which kinds of sentence and language devices or strategies should we cover in year 7 versus year 8 versus year 9 or 10, and how can we embed lots of checking for understanding using writing so that it's an efficient way to practice and check that our students are making connections. I'll speak today a little bit about checking for understanding and engagement norms as two things that come out of the science of learning that might be really helpful for your classroom practice. But one of the engagement norms that I really love, which I'll talk about in a moment, is full sentence answers, which is where we get students to orally or verbally provide responses as a full sentence rather than, say, a one-word answer or a quick response. And that is as a chance to formalize that academic language before we actually commit it to paper. Students should write across subjects and not just for writing. So this is really important in the secondary context because we are writing in order to learn, not just learning how to write. And I think we can have the best of both worlds there by teaching writing in a practical and a short burst sort of way, but really getting the focus on writing for the curriculum and therefore learning from what we are writing. And my last point here, which has appeared in the middle there, is that knowledge underpins writing. And I think this hopefully is evident that we can't really write about something that we know nothing about. And this is important because sometimes we ask students to just start writing when maybe they haven't got the background knowledge or the vocabulary to do so. So our job is to really ensure that they understand the key content of our subjects, of our disciplines, and ensuring that the writing is a facilitative process for them clarifying and connecting with that knowledge. So before we go further, these are my key messages. Let's dive into the science of learning and then look at some different writing strategies that I think are pretty fundamental and that help guide your work as secondary teachers, because it is apparent that we all need to consider ourselves not just teachers of our disciplines, but teachers of writing for those disciplines. So some science of learning principles I want to share with you, mainly a little definition and then a brief model that gives you an insight into this. So in case you haven't seen a definition like this before, I know this term is being used a lot in the New Zealand context at the moment. The science of learning is essentially a summary of existing cognitive science research on how students learn and which connects to practical implications for teaching. So one problem with this definition, even though it's quite accurate, is that it doesn't tell you all the stuff. And I think today I'll give you a little insight into some of that stuff that's important to understand and that will frame up, I guess, why it is that writing is so tricky and how we can help our students to do better. So the simple model of memory may be something you're familiar with, may not be. It's essentially also called the information processing model and goes a little bit like this. So what we can learn from the environment is infinite. So the subjects that we're wanting our students to learn, the books that they can read, the experience they can have, there's no shortage of things that they can learn. Interestingly, long-term memory is also practically limitless. So where that learning is stored is called long-term memory, and there's no real limitations on how much we can get students to learn. Interestingly, we still have to have their attention first, and attention in noisy or busy or distracted classrooms or classrooms with devices and so on. It might be quite hard to maintain our students' attention. Learning will happen once we have their attention, but not before it's processed somewhere else. It doesn't just go straight from our conscious sort of attention to long-term memory. The other buffer that gets in the way is something called working memory. And working memory is not like long-term memory at all. Working memory is actually very limited. And I often play a game with participants in sessions like these where we look at how limited our own working memory is. We don't have the time or the luxury today, but essentially we can hold around 4 to 7 items. And if we want to process those items, probably 2 to 4 is probably more accurate. So doing something actively with those individual pieces of information, we can only handle quite a small amount. However, once we overcome that limitation of working memory and get things into students' long-term memory, there is no storage limitations here. We will forget some things, which you can see here as part of that model, but ideally we will remember quite a lot. And when students make connections across your subjects, they're remembering things and therefore bringing stuff back into their awareness from their long-term memory. So if we can get things past this initial working memory limitation, we can ensure that students are able to learn as much as possible. And something important that sort of summarizes these principles in another way is the Stanislas Dehaene's 4 pillars of learning, which is another way of coming at some of this research. I'm not sure if you've seen these pillars before, but they align beautifully with what we just talked about. So the first pillar is attention. We need to have our students focus, because if they're thinking or focusing or looking at other things, it is impossible to get the learning to happen. Out of interest, I wonder if we could share in the chat some of the things that you see as stealing your students' attention, given that it is a precious commodity in your classrooms. If you could share in the chat some of the things that are distracting students or that are stealing their attention, that would be great to get a sense of some of the issues that you're grappling with in your own settings. Okay, devices, gaming, video streaming, social interactions. Yeah, overly busy PowerPoints. Yeah, great point there. Try to keep them really focused, ideally. Great. Where to sit. So something that has been working well in some secondary settings is to actually create seating plans for different subjects or different classrooms. And the seating plan just allows that annoyance of thinking about who's going to sit next to whom a lot more easy. Personal issues, what's going on for them, what they bring with them, environmental factors, background noise, tiredness, hunger, peers, too hot, too cold in the environment, lost ability to focus. Yeah. And look, we are in an environment where attention of our students is fractured and potentially is more fragile than usual because of the constant use of high dopamine sort of technology, which is what we could probably class as an addiction for some young people of social media and online gaming, which essentially means that their attention is being sort of constantly interrupted, if you like, by notifications, by short sort of videos that do make it harder for them to focus for longer stretches. So the work of school is to try and ensure that we build as much focus and concentration and to harness the attention that we have from them. But as a result, we have to be quite strategic at how we do that, and ideally remove as many distractions or address as many of those problems that have been identified in the chat today as possible. If we don't, we probably doom ourselves to not actually effectively teach very well, because the tension is the very first beginning of this model. The next one is active engagement. So this is important because we don't want students to passively sit there. And the science of learning actually requires learners to really be an active and participant in every single part of the day. So essentially, if you're lecturing or if you're just delivering content and hoping for the best and not getting participation or engagement, this is a problem for your students being able to really engage with the learning. So active engagement is important because it helps remind us that, yes, you want the teacher to be clear about how they're structuring the learning, but ideally they're giving lots and lots of feedback and lots of engagement opportunities. That connects to here around error feedback. And if you are still holding some of those notions that say explicit teaching, which falls out of the science of learning, is one way or is directive in that way, actually it's very dynamic and it's very interactive. And that error feedback is part of that sort of loop, if you like, where we're wanting to give as much feedback to students as possible, both of their spoken and their sort of thoughts as well as their writing. And it's important to actually do that on the spot wherever possible, because that's where and when they're thinking about it. These long form sort of bits of feedback that we give many sort of days or sometimes weeks later does not necessarily close the loop fast enough. And if we want students to learn, we should try and give them that feedback in the moment wherever possible. And then consolidation. So knowing that once we teach something once and give feedback on it it's not enough. Actually, we need to take into account that forgetting is part of the challenge, and that we're wanting students to have opportunities to connect and to consolidate their learning across many different facets. So one thing I'll leave you with here around the science of learning before we turn to writing is that these engagement norms might be something that help you in your work. And I did hint at one of them, which is full sentence answers, but there's many other ways to liven up and increase the energy and the engagement of your lessons. And this includes using writing as a tool for thinking. Why use them? Because working memory is so fleeting. We need to ensure that students are given many opportunities to stay focused and looking at the learning that we're wanting them to. So little tools like pronounce with me, for example. So if you've got difficult vocabulary, getting the students to say it back is really important. Track with me. This is where they track along and read in their heads as you read a text out loud, even just a few sentences. The same here is read with me, which is some choral reading. One or two phrases or a sentence at a time can be so powerful, just to activate the room and ensure that no one's focusing on something else, that they're all reading together. Takes a bit of practice, but is an incredibly useful piece of material. Gestures as well. So getting students to gesture for complex terminology can be great. And we have an episode of the podcast that I host with Rebecca Birch, a secondary English teacher, on the importance of gesture and how teachers can use these kinds of engagement norms really effectively, even in the secondary classroom. Pair shares are really, really valuable, getting students to work in an accountable sort of way with their partner. So answering questions, sharing answers, having a partner A and a partner B can make this so much more accountable and so much more effective. So if you haven't looked at pair shares before, this is a really great opportunity. Attention signals, an efficient way to get your students to come back after they do a pair share, as well as to get their attention before you start instructing. So much of the time we probably teach and we don't necessarily have all our students focusing. So giving them a cue you, that means this is the time to come back and focus, and waiting until you have 100% focus could be one of the best ways that you engineer that. So you can use knock, knock, who's there, for example, or I like to say coming back in 3, 2, 1, for example. These can be really quick ways of getting students to come back and focus. And then whiteboards. Out of interest, in the chat, if you would like to put in a thumbs up or a yes if you have mini whiteboards in your secondary classroom. This is something that is becoming more popular in Australia. They're essentially a tool that you can use. Some yeses already. They're a tool that you can use to get students comfortable and practicing skills like writing, but anything across the curriculum, really, maths and science and diagrams and all kinds of things. But what is great about them is that you can see their answers from far away, which means that you can get a sense of what students are doing and thinking quite well. You've also got full sentence answers. So having a public voice and academic vocabulary like we talked about before, this can be fantastic to ensure that students have to respond to a full answer. So rather than saying blue, they have to say the answer is blue because the diagram shows deoxygenated blood, for example. So giving a really, really clear and full sentence answer with reasons, for example, rather than just a one-word answer. And in this way, we get students to practice the grammar and the vocabulary that we want them to in the class. So that's a little tour or a little introduction to the science of learning principles that might be helpful. There's a book that I have written trying to share some success stories and some opportunities for schools to make use of this body of knowledge. You can Google it or you can scan this QR code if you want to learn a little bit more. There's a little briefing on that QR code that tells you a bit about what the power of this book might be for your setting and how it might help you. But with no further ado, I'd like to return back to talking about writing specifically and looking at something called the Writing Revolution, which is a really excellent resource that I highly recommend you look at because it has such relevance for the secondary curriculum classroom. So some principles from the Writing Revolution, as well as a set of resources that are called Write to Learn, which are available on my website. The Writing Revolution principles go a bit like this, and they have this strong connection to all the things that we've talked about so far, and they align so beautifully with the science of learning that we've talked about. So students need explicit instruction in writing beginning in the early years. So in many ways, we're making up for lost time in secondary because writing teaching needs to be quite explicit and needs to be from the early years of school. So you have a difficult task in that you should have received year 7, 8, or 9 students who are ready to learn and ready to keep progressing with their writing, but maybe have some fundamental gaps in their understanding of how sentences and paragraphs work, which essentially need to be addressed. So this is not easy for you as a secondary teacher in order to fix this. Sentences are the building blocks of writing, as we've talked about. That's a big Writing Revolution principle. And then when embedded in the content learning areas of the curriculum, writing instruction is a powerful thinking tool, which we've talked about. Essentially, one way to get around this is to introduce a new writing strategy in what we call everyday ideas or out of content, and then quickly embed these back into the knowledge from the curriculum, sometimes called in content. So if you are introducing, say, a strategy for students to link ideas together using a transition word like therefore, you might want to practice the first or second example with some everyday examples, much like the everyday examples that are included in your assessment. Notice how the examples in these sentences here are quite generic. So they're not looking for rich subject knowledge. They're looking for pure grammar knowledge in that way, which in many ways it should be quite teachable given they don't have to combine the two together. The purpose of writing isn't to complete grammar exercises like this, like they've tapped into that assessment. The purpose of writing, of course, is to ensure that students can really articulate their understanding and progress their thinking in your subject. So if you are introducing some new writing strategies, you can do them out of content to begin with, but then notice this adverb here, quickly embed these in knowledge from the curriculum. So let me give you a little sample of what one of these Writing Revolution strategies might look like and just how powerful they might be for your work. This is a famous one called because, but, so, and I'm going to explain to you what all of those words mean. So this is from one of these materials in Write to Learn that I've used many, many times with schools in secondary and primary, freely available and ready to download, but probably geared more towards primary. I have an even better resource for secondary, which I'll share with you after this. So we can use conjunctions in sentences to join together two ideas. Because explains why something is true. For example, I forgot my lunch today because I was running late. But indicates a change in direction. Here we've got a comma before the but, which is important because it's a different kind of conjunction. I had canteen money gives a change in direction for the sentence. And then so tells us what's happening as a result of something else. So I forgot my lunch today, so I was hungry. So this is a really simple sort of set of strategies that allows something that we can do where we get students to answer questions differently based on these different endings. So this is a health example. So if you're a health or PE or a science teacher, this might be a useful sort of example for you, but this can be adapted to any subject, essentially to extend students' thinking and to practice these basic sentence level skills at the same time. So here we have a sentence stem that's common amongst the three examples, and students are being asked to respond with a different ending to each of these sentences. So daily exercise is an important habit. And in this slide, the teacher models the left example. So this is my example, and then the students will complete the right example. So this is called guided practice, if you like, where I'm showing one and then getting students to practice the other. Daily exercise is an important habit because I need to provide a reason, as it says here. It improves your heart health. Daily exercise is an important habit, but so this needs to be a change in direction. It can be hard to maintain, for example, and many answers are possible here. This is the beauty of this exercise, is that students can think of and generate really interesting answers. And then so you should make time in your routine. Is an example of how we can have a same sentence stem and finish it in three different ways. This might be a sentence stem that you use in the health context around childhood obesity as a topic, and the students are being asked to complete it in three different ways. So just out of interest, choose one of these ways to respond in the chat. I'll be really kind to you and allow you to go ... before the because, and then put your answer like that, as well as a ... and then practice putting the comma in. And then a but. So see if you can do one of these as an example response, the way that your own students might be able to do a response like this in the middle of one of your sessions. Oh, I've missed the missed the thing there, which is the so. So if you can respond to one of those just as a bit of a practice to get you an idea of how this works, that would be brilliant. That's what the so should look like. So you can do the ... and then just fill in the blank there for the end of that sentence. I won't make you write out the base sentence, although students should probably think about doing that so that they practice doing full sentences. Excellent. So Jessica's given us a reason, because it costs the government lots of money, the increasing amount of sugar in our foods. And there's a great so ending there. So we need easy access to a range of healthy food. Excellent. And the beauty of this exercise, as I've talked about, is that you can do this with many different kinds of strategies. Yeah, but it's not the child's fault. It's crucial. We implement strategies to address this. So Donna, you're just missing your conjunction there. So I just need to get you to choose because, but, or so. I wonder which one would work. Maybe so. It is crucial we implement strategies to address this. Would probably work the best, I think, Donna. But there are many underlying causes making it difficult to address. Excellent. Thank you. So this little task, if you like, is a really useful one because it does allow us to use writing as a tool for thinking, but it also gets us to practice a full sentence that we could use in an extended response, which I think is something that is probably understated at this point. Another strategy which I really like is called expanding sentences, and you could use this in any of your subjects really. Essentially showing how you can take a simple kernel sentence or a really short sentence, which always has to start with a full sentence here, but essentially add more details such as a when, adjectives, a how, or a what. In this one, you can get students to generate those different aspects, maybe from a passage or a text that you have been reading or a topic that you've already been studying, but you can also provide those to students in the initial stages to help them do this better. So when we might say frequently, raging, we can put an adjective in, abruptly, we can do a how, and its shallow banks is the what. So the finished product, which students might work up to doing, is something like this. Frequently, the raging river has abruptly overflowed its shallow banks. So you can see how we've changed the nature of the sentence here, but kept the meaning the same. It's still about a river overflowing, but now we have a lot more content. And this is the idea of expanding sentences, allows students to put more of their thinking, more of their knowledge, more of their understanding into what is still a simple sentence. This is not a sentence that has any grammatical complexity, apart from the fact that it has some additional sort of adverbials or different whens and wheres and things like that. And this can be done in lots of different ways. My tip with this strategy, if you were having a go at it, is that we want to ensure that students, that you've actually modeled how it might fit. So don't just choose these prompts arbitrarily. Try and ensure that you've actually modeled it so you can show what a good one would look like. So that's expanding sentences. And now I want to just take a back step, if it's okay, and just explain why these key sentence strategies are important. And this goes back to the fundamental issue that we identified at the start, is that sometimes students don't know how sentences work. And certainly, I know I keep bringing back this example, but maybe I'll choose the other example from the week 2 one here, where I've got similar ones. That students won't be able to fix these kinds of sentences unless they understand how sentences work. So if I zoom right in here, I wonder, I know this is a little bit cheeky of me, I wonder, is it number 1, 2, 3, or 4, which is the correctly punctuated sentences? See if you can have a go. I don't know if you feel confident, but I'm going to explain why in just a moment. If you want to hang back, if you feel confident, you can give an answer. But have a look, which one, and how would you know which one is the correct one? Just going to put it straight onto the slide here. Ooh. There we go. There it is, if you want to keep considering that while I just fix this thing. There we go. I wonder if anyone's giving, no one's brave enough to give an answer. It might be indicative of the fact that this is such a foreign or a difficult sort of task that we haven't necessarily gotten students to do before. I think this is important to keep in mind, that this might be actually quite out of left field for a lot of students. Okay, we've got some responses. Most people are saying 4. Or the last one. Let me look at why that's the case in just a moment. I'm going to keep this here as a reference for us to come back to. So I've got this now pasted for us, given it's a useful example to demonstrate what I was just going to do. We'll come back in just a moment. So I will reveal the answer in a moment. I don't want to leave you on tenterhooks for too long, but let's look at why the answer would be correct before I give you what the answer is. So what makes a sentence? Essentially, a sentence is made up of 2 main components. Every regular sentence will have a subject and a predicate. Most simple ones, a subject will be a noun phrase and the predicate will always be a verb phrase. For example, if I just simplify it, oh, there's an adverbial. Let me just skip that. I'll come back to adverbials. Essentially, the subject could be something like the who of the sentence, the dog, or sometimes the concept of the sentence, the focus. But it's always at the start of the sentence like this, unless, like I showed you just before, a little adverbial sort of pops in, like in the morning, at lunchtime. You might have that before here, the dog. But essentially, the verb phrase or the predicate is the what the person or the concept is doing. So it's where the verb is happening. So if we take that sort of basic concept of subject versus predicate and apply it to some simple sentences, some of these are easier than others, but essentially we should be able to, as I like to do with my students, circle the subject in every one and underline the predicate. Sometimes it's one word for a subject, and usually the predicate is all the rest. Here we've got her dear cousin is the subject. So all of that is the subject and the rest is the predicate. Whereas this one, we've got one word again, it's the concept, stargazing, and then here's the predicate. So this is a similar task that we can do to find incorrectly punctuated sentences or run-ons. And this is essentially what I want to do now with those examples before. So if we look at this, I wonder if you can help me find the subject and predicate of these examples. Let's just take the first one, given it's the same words with the just different punctuation. So your brain creates new links. What would be the subject of this first part? Your brain creates new links. What's the subject of that sentence? Your brain. So if I circle that, I'm then going to underline the predicate But essentially, I need to make sure I know, is this part of the predicate or not? Let me read this and see if there's another subject and predicate here. Using what you learn makes those links stronger. So obviously, this is an incorrect apostrophe there for an easy sort of reason. We know that, as is this one. But ignoring the apostrophe for the moment, using what you learn makes those links stronger. If you didn't realize this, the subject of this sentence is actually this. It's something called present participle phrase that we've used. And this is actually a really difficult subject for students to find, but it's essentially that is the subject of the sentence, using what you learn. And the predicate is this part, makes those links stronger. So essentially, we need to put full stops between these subject and predicate, as well as the next one. This is the subject of the next one, and then this is the predicate. So subject, predicate, full stop, subject, predicate, full stop, subject, predicate, full stop. And I wonder if that's why this one is the correct answer. So subject and predicate, full stop, using what you learn, subject, predicate, and then full stop, yes, and then subject, predicate, full stop. What's tricky about being a writing teacher or a teaching of secondary is that actually this knowledge about subject and predicate might be optional in terms of your own background. Maybe you did benefit from some grammatical instruction or some second language learning that taught you a little bit about this, but often not. And that is a really hard ask. But essentially, the only way to remove these kinds of run-ons is to essentially to get really good at fixing fragments by fixing run-ons and fragments by finding subjects and predicates. So here's a classic example of some run-ons here. And this is the kind that we will probably see quite a bit. So my car sputtered and stalled. It needed a tune-up. Can you help me fix this run-on by finding the subjects and predicates? I'll give you a hint. Here's my car. I need to keep going until I find any more subjects and predicates. My car sputtered and stalled. Seems like there's something that needs to go there. Here's another subject. Can anyone write what the correctly punctuated version of this sentence might be if I found another subject? And then indeed, I found another predicate there. Some people are typing, I can see. Yeah, so you could put a colon here. Yep. I often don't teach. So a semicolon would look like that. I often don't teach semicolons because I talk about them as like a weapon that students won't know how to use properly. The colon actually is probably quite justified in this case, but we probably need to just try and encourage students to correctly use a full stop. Needs a comma and then a conjunction. Yeah, so you could use a comma and a conjunction. So that'd be one way to fix it. So let me just show you how that might look. The other way to connect these sentences is by putting a conjunction in. So for example, you could put a comma there and do and or a so potentially. Maybe a so would even work better. So my car sputtered and stalled, so it needed a tune-up would actually be probably even better. And that is another way that you can correctly separate sentences when they do have problems like this. Here's one that is probably really common as well. The sentences, as they get longer, it's harder to spot where the sentence boundaries should be because we can link sentences in lots of different ways. The classroom was chaotic. Papers were strewn about, students chatting loudly, making it difficult to focus. That's actually really hard to punctuate, mainly because there's a special kind of clause here that I might teach you at the end if we've got time, called a ving clause, which is actually part of a sentence that we add in to make the sentence more interesting. So let me just figure out if I can punctuate this correctly. So find my subject and predicates and I should be able to do it. The classroom was chaotic. Full stop. Papers, when in doubt, do a full stop before you start experimenting with conjunctions. Papers were strewn about, students chatting loudly, making it difficult to focus. Now here, students chatting loudly isn't a sentence by itself. So this is one of those additional adverbials that can be added. And then if I put a comma here, suddenly I've got it working well. So I've got two sentences now. The classroom was chaotic. And if you wanted to, you could do a colon here to say this is what happened next. So a colon would work there, but I'd probably stick to a full stop in the first instance. Papers, capital P there, was strewn about, students chatting loudly, making it difficult to focus. Here's my what's called a ving clause, which you can learn about at the end if we get a chance. But essentially, the skill of finding subjects and predicates and separating students' writing so that it's accurate is probably one of the fundamental ones. And it goes back to that understanding of what makes a sentence. So it's important that students know that their sentences are made up of subjects and predicates. And I do teach this directly to students in order to help them to make better choices. There's many other things and other sentence strategies that I guess complement this, but they all go back to what a sentence is and just how important that is. One of the really nice ones that I'll share with you now, which is the VIN clause, which I talked about, basically shows that once you've got simple sentences working well, you can get students to combine them together in more interesting ways. For example, a VIN clause is a group of words that begins with a verb, like we saw just in the previous example, and adds a dependent clause to the sentence. If you haven't heard of that distinction of independent and dependent, this is all knowledge that you can should be able to get your head around before you start doing this advanced one. But I just wanted to show you it because it's quite nice. The VIN clause provides extra information on what the subject is doing, and it modifies the subject. So you can put it at the beginning of the sentence, or you can put it at the end of the sentence after the predicate. So here's an example of a VIN clause that we can add in. The base sentence is the man launched an attack, and we can make it more interesting by putting in keeping his balance. And you notice that we can move that around the sentence. It's quite a useful one. But here, I always need to make sure I've got my understanding of where the subject is, there's the subject, and where the predicate is. And if I can find that, then I know that this is an additional dependent clause or additional clause that we've added in that also can be removed. It's not necessary for the students, for the sentence to make sense. So a VIN clause can be quite nice. So if you're studying history, for example, we've got a nice sentence here: Caesar Augustus, the father of Rome, lived humbly. I can put in a VIN clause to make this even better. Ruling over his empire, Caesar Augustus, the father of Rome, lived humbly. So this allows me to include more information without having to start a new sentence. So if you haven't seen that before, I have a little blog post that explains that in more detail. If you Google my name and then VIN clause, it'll come up. Otherwise, I'm happy to share you an example later as well. What's a really good resource, though, for you as secondary educators is one that actually really takes into account the discipline of that you're trying to teach. And in the 5 or so minutes that I've got left before we'll open up to questions, I want to introduce you to this resource called the Aero Writing Framework and show you what it might be useful for. Before I do that, can I just double check? I think I've checked this once before. Can I check that this link works? So this is a tool called Writing in Science. Can you just check that this link works and it doesn't block you because you're in New Zealand? I just want to make sure. If I can get a yes in the chat to say that the geolocation means it's okay. It does work? Good. All right. I'm glad that the Australian Education Research Organisation is generous enough to share it with our New Zealand colleagues, because everyone should benefit from this resource. Let me just show you a little example. So they've got this new framework called the School Writing Instruction Framework, which is a whole model for understanding how to address writing in the secondary context. And what it does is really gives you key understandings and knowledge about how writing works. And it's all free, which is amazing, but it also has an instructional model for how to teach writing in schools, as well as some professional development courses. So one of these is really, really powerful. It just gives you an understanding of how writing works and being able to take you through some steps to understand. Now it says NAPLAN here, but you could say the same for your assessment. Understand what the strengths and weaknesses of your students' writing are. And then this course here, Understanding Sentence Structure and Grammar, essentially gives you a crash course in the things that we were just talking about there. It's all really easy and quite simple to do. And it actually, includes lots of things around verbs, nouns, clauses, like I've been hinting at, simple and compound and complex sentences, connectives, such as these ones that connect different sentences together, like however, therefore, finally, and though. These are really, really beautiful tools that you can use to make it easy. There's my colleague Rebecca Birch, featured from the Chalk Dust podcast. And then if you haven't seen the connection just yet, we know that students writing can benefit from more formal academic writing if they are getting basic sentence structure right. This one on normalization allows us to show students how to become more formal in their academic writing using nominalization, so becoming nouns. So students might be writing things like this, where the sentences are quite simple, and after nominalization, we get them to say the same sorts of things in more complex ways. So instead of the introduced being a verb in this sentence, we can make it more formal by nominalizing it. The introduction of new school road rules will help ensure the safety of students. You can see how the normalization really lifts the tenor of that. So I really love this resource, and I think it should be something that does inform your next steps in terms of considering how best to teach writing. But what I love about it is that it complements and does something slightly different to some of those other resources that we talked about from the Writing Revolution. If you haven't seen the Writing Revolution as well, you can start looking at this. Some of these materials are free that you can download. If you sort of Google Writing Revolution free resources, it comes up with lots of customizable templates that you can use to do the Writing Revolution strategies. And here is the 2.0 textbook that you can purchase. It's very, very reasonable, and the publishers, I think, have deliberately tried to keep the cost down. Essentially, it's a guidebook for this very process of teaching writing, and it explains a lot of the things that we've been talking about today in a really clear way. There's also this really cool thing that the Writing Revolution is recently launching. It is a paid resource, is something called Judy. This is a chat box that you can use to create content, create sort of writing materials for your subjects based on prompts that you give it using these Writing Revolution strategies. I'm just trying to find, that was the picture of it there, this little, oh, here we go, AI activity generator. So the name of it is Judy, named after Judith Hochman, the creator of the Writing Revolution. And I haven't looked exactly how expensive this is, but this would be something very useful if you are generating lots of materials for your students to use to develop their content knowledge or to practice their writing skills. This would be able to do it, and in a way that aligns beautifully with the Writing Revolution approach, which I highly recommend. Back to something free though, these guides that have been written by the Australian Education Research Organisation are really practical and give them particular sort of context of ways of improving writing for your discipline. So there's one for science, health and PE, and for subject English. And you can generalize these to other subjects as well. They include really gentle and useful introductions to ways of building this sentence sort of knowledge in your students' work. And they help you to clarify, I guess, what you're wanting to get out of your students in the time that you have. So I'm hoping that that little introduction to some of those cool things that are available, many of which are free and some of which are definitely worth looking into, even if it's just the textbook here from the Writing Revolution, which is so useful and helpful. Essentially, let's jump back to this and just bring us back to our key ideas before we wrap up for our questions. My key messages that I've tried to get across to you today that I'm hoping you're starting to see the benefit of is that the sentence and paragraph level is foundational. We didn't really get to paragraphs today, but I would love to direct you to the Writing Revolution to look first and foremost, as well as that Aero resource as well from the Australian Education Research Organisation. Teaching writing effectively and efficiently is really important. So embedding this as a regular thing that you do in your teaching is really powerful and could be a really useful thinking tool that I encourage you to use. So those short example prompts or questions that we used before, like because, but, so, or expanding sentences, for example, these can be really powerful to embed everyday writing in your classrooms, whether it's on mini whiteboards or on children's books. Students should write across the subjects, not just for writing. So actually use it as a tool for thinking and ensuring that they have the background knowledge to really understand what they're writing about. So don't expect them to write a heap in the front end. Ensure that we do provide lots of knowledge and content and then use writing as a way to extend upon, to connect and to go further than that content. That's all from me formally. I just will do a tiny little reminder about a new platform that's coming for schools that give you bite-sized versions of a lot of the materials and the content that I like to do in webinars like this. The resource is going to be called Luminary, and it's launching later this year. If you want to learn a bit more or to put your name down to access it early or to do a trial or a promo, feel free to fill in that little form. The whole idea behind this is to turn my whole day or whole hour sort of PDs into bite-sized 5-minute videos and allow you to access that learning as a staff with your colleagues and to use it to structure your staff meetings or independent sort of reflection or research into different areas. It will be continually added to and updated as new approaches and ideas come out. And the whole idea is to make it as accessible and bite-sized as possible. But thank you very much to the organizers. It's been a real joy to be with you. If you want to stay in touch and learn more, this little link just takes you to my website to see what I've got on there in terms of my writing resources and other materials. But I hope this has been some practical insights into the big challenge that you have of improving writing for your students. And I know that with enough thought and enough opportunity to get the tools that you need, that every teacher can become a fantastic teacher of writing. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Nathaniel. Ngā mihi nui mō te kaupapa o te rā. Thank you so much. That was such an action-packed full hour of strategies, information. You had us working, which was fantastic. And we just thank you so much. I just wanted to stress to everybody here, this is just the beginning of our support and ongoing connection. So Nathaniel, we're really keen to keep in touch and work with you. Thanks for all the resources that you've shared as well. We'll just check the chat before we go. Were there any questions for Nathaniel? Feel free to put your hand up or pop in the chat. Nathaniel's been very generous in recording the session for us. We've got the slides, which we will share with everybody. Just checking that there weren't some questions. So what we'd like to do now is just pop an evaluation form into the chat for us to get some ideas moving forward. What we were really keen to do was to get in and begin some preparedness and some understanding of the science of learning and thinking about our curriculum and assessment change program. There's some lovely comments there. Feel free to use the I was going to call it the reaction button if you want to show your, and some have already. Thank you. We've had some claps and things for you, Nathaniel.
Yeah.
Anything there? Anybody? So we'd love you to just take some time to complete that evaluation so we can keep connected to you. We can send all of this out. Avril and Angie are planning on consolidating this amazing information and putting that into our pānui. So when we send out our next version of Te Hono for secondary kaiako, we'll send lots of things in there for you. But thank you so much.
I'll just share that link again in case it got lost in all of those lovely comments. Thank you, Catherine. That's very kind.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's wonderful. We've got lots of claps coming your way, Nathaniel. And thank you so much for making yourself available very early in the morning over in Australia with your young children about to head off to school for the day.
We managed to get all the piano practice done before 7 a.m. So I think that was quite good.
That's wonderful. And yeah, just a huge mihi to you, Nathaniel. I'm just going to close our session with karakia. I'm just checking that there's no one in the team that wants to say anything before we finish. No, everybody's all good. So
just a big thank you, Nathaniel. That was awesome. We hope we can hear from you again as well.
Thank you, Avril. I'd love to connect with this fantastic group of teachers and leaders again another time, and I'm really excited for you. I know it's a stressful time, but excited to hear about the increasing sort of inquiry that you all sort of embark on to get this approach to writing sort of working in your schools. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All the best with your week. I know it's going to be busy.
Thank you. I'm straight off into an Uber now. I think someone's waiting for me outside. I'm heading to the Marvel Stadium where often the football is being played for a group of schools all doing an incredible day of 1,000 people. So one thing to the next. And I look forward to coming to New Zealand as part of the primary curriculum roadshow in November. So thank you very much for being such a welcoming and amazing people. I'm going to bring the family for the first time, and I can't wait to see some more of your beautiful country.
Oh, kia ora. We'll catch you in Christchurch.
Yes, see you then.
Okay, I'll just close with karakia, and then everybody have a wonderful day and good start to the week. Kua hikatia te kaupapa, kua tāko tō te wero, me hoi tahi I runga I te whakaro kotahi. Te aka tau taua oranga, kia kaha ai mō te tuku taonga, kia tūtuki ngā hia mō ka hikatia. Ti hei mauri ora, ki te whai ao, ki te whai oranga ia, mauri ora. Have a good day, everybody, and thank you once again, Nathaniel. All the best for the rest of your week, and we we look forward to catching up with you when you're in Christchurch. Mā te wā.
Thank you, everyone.